people to put up.
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome back. We're going to get started here now with our Farm Bill panel. My name is Philip Brasher. I know many of you for a number of years from my days as a Washington correspondent for the Des Moines Register, now senior editor with Agri-Pulse Communications. If many of you know us, if you don't, Agri-Pulse.com, I highly recommend it, especially if you want to know what's going on with the Farm Bill, tax reform as it pertains to agriculture, and so many other issues to trade. NAFTA is the NAFTA negotiations starting up quickly. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, four of them, starting with Craig Lane, who's former president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. Craig is a dairy producer from near Brooklyn, east of here. Behind him, Craig Uden, who's president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, has a feedlot operation, cow-calf operation in Nebraska.
Thank you.
Next door, Gary, also from a neighboring state, Gary Wertish, president of the Minnesota Farmers Union, from near Renville, up in the Minnesota Valley, grows corn, soybeans, and navy beans. And finally, somebody who doesn't need an introduction, but Dr. Wendy Wintersteen, Dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences at Iowa State University, and obviously one of our most prominent land-grant universities in the country. We're going to start out with, I'm going to ask each of you give 2 or 3 minutes, your thoughts, priorities on the Farm Bill. Craig.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to thank Summit Farms for putting this together. I think it's very important for agriculture and our communities across the agriculture sector. I am a 5th-generation farmer. I have been involved from a policy perspective in at least 3 of the farm bills, 96, 02, and 08. And now I'm back on the farm. We have a relatively small dairy in standards today. My 2 sons milk 650 cows 3 times a day, and they have a cow-calf operation plus a row crop operation. We're a little unique because we have 3 generations on the farm. My father, who's 91 and a half, is active in the farm. My brother and I, we don't do a whole lot of work. Then our 2 sons manage the operation. And as many of you know, my father and their grandfather still tells everybody what to do and how to do it each day. But we work through that. I've had a lot of experience in travel. Thank you to Farm Bureau. I've traveled to many countries. I understand how important trade was, and the last panel was very interesting, but the Farm Bill panel will be interesting too. And I would say one thing from the advice of the current Iowa Farm Bureau president is that we need to get this Farm Bill passed, and the sooner the better.
Good. Great.
Well, thank you for having me here today. Thanks for Summit Farms putting this on. I think it's always good to communicate with producers out there. I think it's vitally important. We talk about issues that are facing the Midwest. You know, I'm a neighboring state, Nebraska, and agriculture is rather unique to this region, and this is what drives their economy. So it's vitally important that we stay engaged. I think that's the biggest call to action out there, is stay engaged and know the issues and try to move this thing forward. I am a feedlot owner in central Nebraska. I'm one of the partners. I'm no longer managing that. I like to say I'm a 4th generation, but I got to start the whole thing over by venturing to the western part of the state to build a feeding operation, and then consequently the cow-calf operations have come along. So my role at NCBA, I moved up through the checkoff side and then moved over into the policy side, so I've been very engaged with the issues affecting the beef industry. I'll probably bring a little different perspective. I won't have quite as many asks. I'll probably have some non-asks and some different, little bit of a different venue for you this morning. We want to work on conservation, the checkoff, the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank. Those are some of our topics of mind. Strong research programs that are benefiting, and we're more into about how this Farm Bill can help our producers, educate them to be better equipped to both handle the domestic but also the international, because we know how vital trade is. Thank you.
I'm Gary Wertish, President of Minnesota Farmers Union. I'm my son's hired man on the farm now. I farm with my son, but I'm going to help him as long as I physically can. I remember my father, that's what he did for me too, until he wasn't able to work, and that's what's fun. And I have a grandson that's coming behind that's very interested in farming. It reminds me of my son at that stage. So, as a president of farm organization and all you guys up, that's what we're about. We're about the future, about our kids and their grandkids staying involved in agriculture. And provide, agriculture, it's got its ups and downs, but it's a good way of life. Good way to raise a family, and we need to keep it strong. Minnesota Farmers Union, we just got done holding about 16 listening rural voices discussions around the state of Minnesota, and focus on Farm Bill and other issues. And as we go forward debating this upcoming Farm Bill, I guess we look at the Farm Bill. We should be writing a Farm Bill to address the needs of rural America, farmers, ranchers, and rural America, and not be going into the Farm Bill saying we got to cut. We've cut out of the last Farm Bill. We already, as you say, we already gave at the, we already gave our blood, gave at the bank. So you would think, you look at when we went into what they called the Great Recession just a few years ago. A little bit after that, in agriculture, we had a period there on the commodity side and livestock side too. We had decent prices. We had fair prices. We had some profitability on the farm, and that money got invested back into our economy. It's probably kept our country from going into a depression. So now that it's reversed. Right now we're struggling on the ag side. We have a fairly decent looking crop right around here. It's need a little bit of rain, but it's a crop that doesn't cash flow. You get in the western states, Montana and the Dakotas, and then earlier they're experiencing severe drought. Earlier we mentioned about the wildfires in the Kansas area. So there's definitely a need out there. We take look at it. We need to invest in rural America, and the Farm Bill. Farm Bill is the most major piece of legislation for rural America. It's a safety net not only for the farmer but for our rural communities. So and we look at instead of cutting, you got all the commodity titles within the Farm Bill. They're all very important. You got the commodity title. You got nutrition, the rural development, energy. They're all important. They all need to be protected. The SNAP program. There'll probably be a lot of, everybody wants to protect their own program, so they'll probably, I've heard comments they're going to go after SNAP again. But as you talk, the recent studies coming out. The majority of SNAP, or a higher percentage of rural people are on that SNAP program than in the urban. And of that, the majority of the people are on that period. In Minnesota, one of the directors that administers the program, he said that the majority of the people are on that program for a 9-month period of time. And most of them are because of an illness or a temporary loss of a job. And also within that, the majority of the people receiving the benefits are children and the elderly. So I guess, it's, as we all struggle to get our parts of the Farm Bill, we're all in this together. So we need to go back, and as I said earlier, we need to be going into it not looking at what we're going to cut, but maintaining what we can do to keep rural America strong.
Wendy?
Well, as Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Iowa State University, I believe one of the most important parts of agriculture is having a strong basis in science leading to innovation and the connection to education as well. So in the Farm Bill is Title VII, which is about research, extension, and education. And we can look back over the history and see what a difference the land-grant colleges of agriculture and veterinary medicine and extension services have made, not in just innovative technologies, but in very important management practices that farmers across the country have adopted. So science and really through research and education.
Well, Bruce could not have scheduled this summit at a better time as far as the Farm Bill. You just heard Senator, those of you who were here, Senator Grassley said they hope to have a Farm Bill by Christmas, which is extremely aggressive schedule. However, I will say it's getting very serious. I know during this recess, the House Agriculture Committee has a number of proposals at the Congressional Budget Office trying to get estimates out of them. So they really, on both sides of Capitol Hill, plan to hit the ground running when they get back in September. And as the senator said, Republicans really would like to pass something after what happened with health care. One little ground rule here for our panel. This is actually an unusual farm bill. There is no source of new money for this bill. All they have to spend, and Chairman Conaway on the House side and Chairman Roberts on the Senate side have both been clear about this. All they have to spend is what they have within the bill. And so this is going to be a bill about shifting around money within the titles for different priorities. There's not going to be money from killing direct payments or some other source. So we've got to talk about priorities. Where do you shift money around? Here's the question I have for you. Let's say that the two committees said, we've got to get this bill passed. We're going to simply extend the existing bill, the titles the way they are. What one or two things would make you go to your senator and congressman and say, wait, you can't do this. You've got to fix these one or two things? Wendy, I'll start with you.
Well, sure, and recognizing that there's not any additional money doesn't stop us from asking Congress to understand the importance of an increased investment in food, agriculture, and natural resources research and associated extension and education programs. We are at such an innovation deficit right now in the public investment. We would say it has to be part of the discussion. When we look at the numbers of public investment in these areas, in the United States, it's less than $4 billion a year. In China, it's almost $9 billion. And if you don't believe that will make a difference in opportunities, then I think that would be a mistaken belief. So we would go in and say, all of us in agriculture, because we all benefit, can demonstrate to the public that an investment in food, agriculture, and natural resources research benefit not only farmers, but they also benefit the public. And we think we can make those arguments, and we're certainly going to be trying. There are really two groups that have stood up trying to build a unifying message in this regard. One is the Riley Memorial Foundation. The other is Supporters of Ag Research. And they're really going to be asking, without any attribution to anybody in particular, they're going to ask for a doubling of the investment.
We should point out, Wendy, research is a little bit different from when we're talking about commodity and crop insurance. Most of the money is not mandatory, right?
Correct. Hardly any of it is
it's
mandatory.
Authorized, and then it's up to the appropriations committees each year to appropriate, to spend that amount of money. So you're talking about really setting targets, and what you all want is a much more robust target in terms of research, which can be done without the budget.
And what's great about agriculture in the sense of the Farm Bill and the politics, from our perspective, of course, is that every state has a land-grant university, if not more than one. And we believe that the connections between the land-grant university, farmers, local communities, it's there to build the political support that's needed to achieve our goal, our target.
Right. Gary, one or two things got to be fixed.
Well, the two things. Right now, we don't have it on the crop side. We don't have an adequate safety net like we need. So, whether it's the ARC payments or the PLC, some examples on the ARC, you'll have one county that'll qualify for a payment to the neighbor right across the road, or could be the same farmer. You got zero payments. So there needs to be some fix there, and then with the insurance, maybe some adjustment. And dairy is the other one. Them are the ones that we hear And then Sonny Perdue will be here later, and he'll talk about cotton. So those are the things that come up that need some tweaking to give the adequate safety net to keep people in business. That's what we need. We don't need to be guaranteed a profit. We just want to stay in business.
I'm going
Brad,
to probably jump in a little bit with Wendy as far as the research, protecting that research component as far as all the challenges that we're facing out there today, whether it be activists or fitting into a global market. We have to continue this research on. Somebody's got to do it that has that credibility in moving it out and educating not only our producers, but also our consumers that really has that voice out there that can make a difference and bring that distance together a little bit. The other thing that we probably would say that we have to have a fix on, and this is a growing threat every day, and that is the foot and mouth disease, the FMD vaccine line that we would like to see. It's $150 million a year for 5 years to build a specific line on foreign soil to have the necessary antigens over there to fight off this disease when it probably touches our soil. You know, we have a lot of travel back and forth, and it's very prevalent in other countries. There's about 23 different strains. It is mandated that we cannot have it on our soil. The cost to our industry, in the beef industry, they suggest to be somewhere in that $50 billion after the first year, $50 billion. But if you shut down commerce and you don't have a vaccine or a way to handle this with a secure plan, and a secure plan means the vaccination, not only the beef people, but the pork people, and if the beef and pork are shut out of export markets, you know, that's in the beef sector, that's $300 a head, and that doesn't come back very fast. Pork could be devastating as well. And what we're looking at is moving forward on that FMD specific line of vaccine. And for $750 million, that's a pretty small price to pay to protect upwards to $200 billion worth of lost ag economy. That would be devastating not only to producers, but also to our rural infrastructure. It would not survive. And that challenge and that threat grows daily as we move into more of a global society.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, that's the number one ask for the pork producers as well. Craig?
Well, thank you, Phil. This gives me plenty of time to prepare what to say. First of all, I have to realize I have a $19.8 trillion debt, and much of Congress is saying that we have to cut within the Farm Bill. In 2008, I was chair of the American Farm Bureau Deficit Task Force. And at that time, we were really concerned about the $11 trillion debt in 2008. And we made recommendations to the body of the American Farm Bureau delegates and the attendees at the annual meeting in Seattle. We thought we really had some good ideas of where we could reduce the deficit, because we said that as farmers, we can't ask other people to take cuts unless you take cuts yourself. And so we gave our presentation in front of the group, and we waited for the applause, and there wasn't any. So what you can see is that farmers are very loyal to what they have now, and we'd have to agree that the crop insurance is a very important component to the Farm Bill. The Northern Plains, northwest Iowa through southeast Iowa is experiencing a severe drought. And they will rely upon revenue coverage from crop insurance. For the most part, the $125,000 limit takes care of most of those, especially if they have a spouse, so they can increase that limit. But I personally believe that, first of all, let's get a farm bill in, let's get it agreed upon. And if Senator Grassley is correct, if we do that by Christmas, it's nothing short of a miracle. And the other part of it is, I would say that what Dean Wintersteen has said that innovation and research are extremely important. I believe they are. Even though the money's authorized yearly, I believe that the proof coming out of our land-grant colleges has proven economic success, and they build economies in rural areas. I think that's very important. The one issue, the conservation title, hasn't been covered. I believe and everything I've read said they're not going to touch it, they won't increase it, it's there, there's no more money. I believe that is extremely critical, especially when we are looking at water quality issues, whether it's Chesapeake Bay, Lake Erie, the Mississippi River. All of those things affect farmers and agriculture. And as farmers, if we can do something that's supported by our state governments or by the federal governments, if it flows through conservation, I think we can make a very marketed improvement on water quality across the United States. So therefore, as a farmer and not involved in farm policy for the last 5 years, I'm not in favor of the draconian cuts that they talk about on caps, but I'd say, reduce it to $100,000, take that $25,000 extra that goes out there. And there's 1.8 million farmers that are in the Farm Bill. I'd say take that money and use it for innovation, for protection on foot and mouth disease, and into conservation, but don't reduce what we have already, because we've been reduced quite a bit. But we have to show Congress that we're willing to take a little bit of cut in order to be what I say credible at the table in the discussions.
Very interesting idea. Let's carry on this water quality issue. I want to come back to you also raised the payment limit issue. Okay. Senator Grassley did as well. We'll come back to that. Gary, talk about the conservation program. Well, first of all, you can react to Craig's idea, but more broadly, are we spending the money in terms of our mix of working lands and CRP, are we in the reserve land idling programs, are we spending the money within those programs the best way we could to address the water quality issues specifically? What's your...
The Working Lands program, part of the CSP program, actually originated out of Iowa here in the 2002 Farm Bill with Senator Harkin as the lead author in the 2002 Farm Bill. We think programs like that we definitely need to expand more of that. In cover crops, one of these fellows had mentioned cover crops. I have a neighbor that, last fall when he harvested his corn, I saw it's all that green out there. Well, he had put cover crop in or seeded it. So, now as we're facing more economic challenging times, I think more, our farmers were more willing to look at things to survive. And water quality, we all have a stake in that. And we have less than 2% of the population. We have to do our part too, and with precision agriculture, we are doing that. But we can always improve too. But the conservation title, I think, if we could move more funds to a working lands program, would be a good step.
So you'd rather see less, if you've got to shift money within the conservation title, move it from the CRP to CSP or equip, or what?
There again, there you got the fight. The problem we have, we can't cannibalize each other, and that's always the fear as you go into the Farm Bill debates. You get regions against regions or commodities against commodities. We're all in this together. So, we're going to be fighting for all that. I'm not going to stand up here and say, well, we're going to shift from EQIP into CSP. They're all important, but as I said earlier, I don't think the whole Farm Bill is only less than 2% of the total federal budget. So, Craig, you made the comment that we got to show doing our part. We have done our part, and you can't balance the budget on the backs of farmers. And that less than 2% of the federal budget isn't, even if we take a cut, it's not going to make a bit of difference on the federal level. So I think right now
agriculture is a quarter of 1%, because 80% of the Farm Bill is food nutrition programs.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. Food stamps. Craig, you about the conservation program, EQIP has obviously been a very important program in the cattle business. What?
I've used the EQIP program in the past, and it's really number one. it lets us manage those acres a lot better for erosion, for actually more production. And I see that in my travels throughout the United States. More and more people are coming along and using the EQIP program for improving water or being more productive with the lands that they have. Going back to a little bit on the cover crop, we chop about 60, 70,000 ton of silage, so it takes that leaves a lot of bare ground. So we've went in with the cover crops and demonstrated the benefits of those cover crops. And you know, it's another good, when you have a cover crop like that, and we have a lot of times we'll bring out tough people, we call, they view agriculture as factory farming or you big guys. And we'll start showing them the cover crop and the care that we put out there and what that has for a benefit for next year's crop and how we manage that. And so it's a good starting point even to communicate with the naysayers out there. So we would believe we're always going to be pushing for the production model, but in a responsible manner is what we're after.
So as you think about the responsibility, and to follow up in your question, Phil, one of the challenges is the independence of agriculture and individuals wanting to not have government regulation or have a lawsuit like what we saw in the Des Moines Waterworks area. At the same time, as you talk about conservation programs, do you think farmers that participate in government programs, collect subsidies or federal crop insurance, should be required, if they accept those, to participate in conservation programs on their farm?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, yes.
We certainly do that on the university farms.
What about conservation compliance? The last Farm Bill was a landmark agreement between the conservation community and the farm groups to relink crop insurance, make it a requirement, conservation compliance, a requirement to get premium subsidies on crop insurance. How is conservation compliance working? Is it enforced adequately? Is it being by USDA? Is it too stringent? What kind of impact is it having?
I'll start. I think the one thing it did do is it put us in a position where we went back to the NRCS and to FSA, and we looked at our original farm plans that were scheduled to reduce erosion, and we took a look at that again and wanted to make sure that we were in compliance. We plant a lot of cover crops on our farm. There's a lot of reasons to use cover crops other than soil erosion and wind erosion, and we can maybe talk about that later, but there's a lot of value in it. I would say from the compliance, I think farmers are doing a pretty good job. I think at the governing, the oversight, it's virtually impossible. It's not being done.
Greg, what's your?
I guess, I'd have to agree with Craig on that. I mean, as for the most part, farmers are trying to do it right, but yeah, it's the oversight. And some of that's, some of that, you have certain staff people at various agencies that are hard to work with too. We need to, work that through, and but their budgets have been cut, so there's less of them out there too. So, but for the most part, I think farmers are trying to do the right thing.
I guess I'd mention that I do think it somewhat matters where you're at and what kind of relationship you've got with NRCS and your FSA.
Yeah, that's great.
So as you think, Wendy, about research programs that the government has funded, in particular on water quality, what would be a couple of ones in the top of your mind that would make the most impact to have happen?
So because of the lawsuit, of course, water quality has been the conversation in Iowa, and we've talked to several state legislative committees over the past year. And when we're asked, where would you spend the first dollar of a state investment, we almost always refer to more permanent practices. Cover crops are great. You get a lot of benefit for a variety of reasons, especially if you have an integrated crop and livestock operation. But we start talking about more expensive structures in some cases that would make a tremendous difference. Wetlands, very expensive, but permanent practices on the land that would address the issue. Less expensive permanent structures, like we have our saturated buffers, edge of field, our bioreactors. Those are all things that are going to make a tremendous amount of difference. The issue, of course, is getting enough of those on the land to make that difference for the state. So as we work with agriculture in the state, whether it's with Farm Bureau or the commodity boards, you see a tremendous amount of commitment to the need to get those practices on the land. But because of the public good aspect, because we aren't having a nitrogen issue because of bad practices, there has to be a public investment as well in those practices, those permanent practices on the land.
Within EQIP in CSP particularly, because they're tied to specific practices, equipment, and so forth, is that money being targeted? You got as a necessity, you got a program, you got 50 states, you got people from all over the country have their different priorities, but are they being targeted enough in terms of what's being subsidized, the taxpayers are funding, to actually address the water quality issue? And you mentioned the Waterworks lawsuit. We just had this, the headlines this week that the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is the largest it's ever been. This is not going. This is what the public all over the country is seeing. This issue is, as Bruce alluded to, is not going away. Within that farm bill, which is getting away from the regulatory, but within that farm bill, in terms of the spending, particularly with CSP and EQIP, is it being targeted enough? And Craig, do you have concerns that it could be too restrictive if you?
Well, the CSP program in my region right now has been changed dramatically, and it's more of a reward for doing, it's always been that way, but it's got a tougher standard today than what it has in the past. So I think some of that's already been addressed. As far as you're going to ask, is it abused? And I'm going to say in certain areas it probably is. But
you don't think it's having the benefit or bringing new?
No, do I think it needs?
Conservation.
I think it needs to be renewed, but I think again it needs to be tied to specifically. It needs to not be quite so broad in certain aspects, or maybe it's region by region. As we talk about water quality in Nebraska, I sit over the Ogallala Aquifer, so that's quite a challenge. We work with NRDs, and we're an irrigation state. We never drought out theoretically, but we do. We work with those NRDs, and those NRD blocks out there are very tight. We can drill no new wells, and consequently, if you take non-irrigated acres and you want to make them irrigated, you have to trade back and forth, and you cannot trade. There's some local control in here too that needs to be. We need programs that are open to people, but we still need a lot of state, in my opinion, state intervention as far as how they're handled in specific regions, because there's no part of the country that's the same. Mm-hmm. So as far as the EQIP funds, I think that's been a great benefit to all of our producers, particularly on working towards a consistent water system and alleviating some of the issues that we would have in the beef production model of streams and erosion of streams and highly erodible soils. So between fencing and tank placement, water management, I think it's been a huge benefit on the EQIP program.
Mm-hmm. Craig, do you have any?
Well, the EQIP money that I know of has been used in dairies and beef operations. We built a 4 million gallon earthen basin, and we didn't apply for any money when we did it, but I think it's been valuable in the places where it has been used correctly as far as retention of nutrients. I think it's been important. I believe it's a $450,000 limit on that, and I think that is the right amount of money for certain amounts of structure, and other structures less than that. But the goal is farmers, regardless if they're livestock, poultry, or crop farmers, need to be aware of their practices that do not allow nutrients to get into the water. Now, a little disagreement that I would have if I was State University is the first dollar to permanent structures. That's going to take a lot of dollars. But if you start to adopt cover crops in your operation, and in Iowa, the new participants, they were paid $30 an acre or so to do that, and so we saw our acres grow to, I think, in excess of 600,000 acres. But we have 20 million acres. And I think farmers themselves need to feel good about the practices that they do that keep the soil in place and also keep the nutrients in place. And sometimes that's nothing more than encouragement through extension meeting along with business industry, and to show the farmers the value of what technology is available to use. And we need to prove to the public that we are doing the things, stepping on, not only supplying them with the lowest cost food anywhere in the world, but we're also sustaining the environment and improving that for the next generation. And you can't write that in a farm bill. I mean, that has to be education and meetings with organizations, the land-grant colleges, with the commodity groups, have to get together, and there needs to be a little peer pressure. So you can't legislate that, you can't provide enough money for it, but enough money ought to be provided so you can maintain the programs you have today.
Wendy, what would it take the land grants to get agriculture to the tipping point where it's really widely, doesn't have to be all 20 million acres, obviously.
Yeah.
So Craig's right. The cost of permanent practices are very expensive. But they give us a more permanent solution.
Sure.
And if you don't have the opportunity for cover crops for whatever the reason, it's another way to think about it. Unfortunately, when we did the science assessment and developed the nutrient reduction strategy, the estimated cost to implement under a variety of different scenarios, a variety of different practices, was $1 billion a year. And that is clearly not available. So it's a big money problem. And again, I just want to say one more time, what we learned through this long process, really led by our Associate Dean, John Lawrence, now serving as interim Vice Provost for Extension, was that we didn't talk clearly with everybody about what was the cause, that it is not about the fall application of anhydrous. That contributes very little. It's not about over-application of rate. It's really about the biological system that exists in these rich soils that we have in Iowa. So I think that was an important conversation to have with a lot of people. This is not about farmers over-applying. And I think that was an important message for people to hear.
Okay. One more question on the conservation, and that's, we're talking about working lands. I want to talk about just one question about Conservation Reserve Program. It's a high priority of Colin Peterson, the ranking Democrat on the House Agriculture Committee, to increase CRP somehow. A lot of pressure from the conservation community, a little in our neighboring states, probably some in Nebraska, but the Dakotas. And it's in Iowa. I know you have some issues too with CRP rates getting ahead of where land rental rates are right now. What needs to be done with CRP, and what do you think about Senator Thune in the Republican leadership? He's proposed this short-term contracts. He doesn't call it CRP. He doesn't call it land retirement, but that's more or less what it is, with haying and grazing possibility. Craig, you want to start with that? Because there's probably some, in the cattle business, there's CRP is...
CRP, we do not see a lot of CRP in our state. In our county, I think it's less than 1%. But in certain areas, you will see a lot of, some land probably wasn't meant for farming, and maybe it needs to be retired. But I'm not real familiar with Senator Thune's project, so I'll let Craig over here talk about that. You know, sometimes when we have CRP and we get into some of these natural disasters, sometimes we could utilize, and we do utilize those set-aside acres or for emergency haying and grazing. But a lot of times it comes too late. So there again, there needs to be some communication up and down how we utilize those in drought situations and tough times. But
They're not quick enough USDA is not able to respond quickly enough in terms of.
Usually what you end up with, the value is so poor. Now, you know, in Montana, they did open the refuge after a natural wildfire, and that was very beneficial to a number of producers up in that sector. But
Craig, any
Well,
thoughts
I
on-
wouldn't be in favor of increasing the acres in CRP personally. I think Farm Bureau is at the same place, and I have to speak a little bit for Farm Bureau since my past has been with them. I think they're the same place. But Senator Thune gave a very interesting idea, the increase of acres that would be utilized. There'd be a 25% reduction if it was hay and graze, and then you could use 33% of it and kind of rotate it from year to year on those acres. And that was always an important part of CRP that we talked about, because CRP came, we lost our pasture ground. We could no longer rent pasture. And if you're a cow-calf operator in need of pasture, it doesn't exist. And I don't think the federal government ought to be in the business of causing a part of the industry to go under because it's no longer available. And we also saw CRP in '85 came along. We lost entire industries and businesses in small communities. Elevators closed, the business left, the land went in rent, and the people took their check, and there was no economic activity. So for that reason, I wouldn't be in favor of increasing the amount, and I also believe that what's happened most recently in the pollinator program is in Poweshiek County, where I live, they paid up to $360 an acre. And that's on good farm ground, took it out. I'm in favor of insects and monarch butterflies and all of those things. I'm much in favor of it. Wendy,
The entomologist likes that.
we don't mow our ditches so the milkweed stays. But the truth of it is, federal government should not be in the business that causes a major change in agriculture opposite of what a free market would be. And CRP certainly did that, and I wouldn't be in favor of any more acres.
I guess I would comment a little bit in certain aspects in certain regions that I've been in, and one in particular in western Nebraska. When he mentioned that CRP came in and took over, there was vast amounts of land. Those communities dried up, and they're not really relevant anymore.
Right.
And then it shrinks your overall tax base and everything else when you don't have vital communities. So it just propels it a little more. You know, I was talking about less than 1%. I happen to have a piece right by my location. I've watched that over the years, and nothing's been done with that. And it's you know, I guess it's a pollinator, but very productive land that could be utilized, and there's no chance of getting. And that wasn't that was a version of CRP, but you absolutely cannot touch that for, I believe, 15 years. It's too long.
Gary, more CRP.
Well, I guess
Some
we've
form or
been
another.
support. The problem with CRP is, a few that mentioned it. When it came in, it took whole farms, and that was the problem. It should be targeted more to. We talked about water quality. So I guess we would be in support of opening it up and increasing the acres. Colin Peterson's my congressman, so I've had a lot of discussions with him on that. But I think if we can target it, we can address areas of water quality. There's things that can be done. But yeah, I'm well aware of whole farms that should have never gone into it, and a lot of it at the time was a high rental rate versus what they could get farming it or renting it out. So that part we don't like. So if we can target it, that we're in favor of that. And Senator Thune's got an interesting proposal. I guess we would support that right now, because it's a 5-year basis. You mentioned land idling. We're at a time now of depressed commodity prices, and we want to trade, do trade agreements, but, frankly, we've got a glut of commodities on them, not only in this country, but worldwide. So until we help get rid of that glut, and in the past, you look at when we had a few years back when we had decent prices, it was due to the severe drought 2 or 3 years in the United States. So, we've never really dramatically increased our prices with trade agreements. They help. But anytime we've had you look back on history, dramatic increase to get prices that we deserve and we need, it's usually been through somebody's problem, drought or some kind of crop problem somewhere. So Senator Thune, with a 5-year rotating, and allowing you to hay and graze on it, that would help a lot of people. The western states now are experiencing drought. We don't know, a lot of times the droughts last more than a year. So we don't know how many years they're gonna be in that before they break that drought. It's just a year or two, they were, in some of the Dakotas, were extremely wet. And now they flip. So that, it would be it's a short-term program, but it might, at this time, it would help a lot.
Okay, you have a vote yes. And I want to turn quickly to the subject of, until we come back to payment limits. Craig, Senator Grassley said he wanted to make sure there were enforceable payment limits. Obviously, he's talking not just about the limits on how much an individual producer can receive from a program, but also the actively engaged rule, the eligibility, and presumably the AGI limit. That's obviously going to be an issue. It always is. It will come up with regard to crop insurance. As he mentioned, I believe an amendment that would have imposed a means test on crop insurance failed by like 5 votes in the House the last time. There's a good chance that's going to come up. I don't think it won't become law. I won't say it, not a good chance, it won't. However, my question is, the argument behind payment limits is that they are needed to protect smaller and medium beginning farmers' ability to compete. And also that it's just makes sense that you just can't, it's not defensible to the public not to have those limits, both on commodity programs, and the same argument is made about crop insurance. How the current payment limits, what impact are they? What impact do they have? Do they need to be changed?
Well, I'll start. I personally, as a farmer and father of 2 young men that are running the operation, I think it's important to have payment limits. And payment limits that covered the first 2,000 acres of production. And on a crop basis, that's nothing compared to our milk that we produce on income level. But I think it's important because, first of all, we need to be part of the deficit reduction. But it also provides that payment protection for the starting farmer and the farmer that has that amount of acreage. I think if you choose to farm 10,000 acres, I don't think the government ought to be in a place to guarantee you a certain amount of revenue on those 8,000 acres above it. And that's always the argument. But I think some kind of payment limit is very important, not just for the farmer, but the farmer's community where the farmer lives. And also, we haven't talked about this at all since 1933, the Agriculture Adjustment Act. We have never had a major food challenge in this country. And I think the farm bills also supply a readily available supply of food and nutrients to its citizens, and that's part of the farm bill. So if you want to analyze it philosophically, there needs to be a payment limit, and that payment limit needs to be somewhere estimated on 2,000 acres and nothing more. And I don't know what that is. I mean, what that limit would be, but I think that's where we need to talk about, because that's a viable operation for a young family that starts, especially if they have a livestock operation with it.
That's an argument that's not going away. And obviously, Farmers Union, we would definitely in support of payment limits, and they probably do need to come down some. But the argument is, what is the size? Is it a 2,000-acre farm here? Or is it a 1,000-acre farm? We don't know. Or the cotton and rice, they'll have a different opinion. So that is a tough one. But the goal should be, and there are some that'll say that farm, the one side will say that farm bills and farm programs have driven people off the farm. But I guess if they're administered right, the goal is to keep people on the farm. We're faced at a time at less dollars. They keep talking to less dollars to work with. So payment limits would be a way to help spread them dollars around. So it's not too many years ago we used to hear about the Scottie Pippen rule. Well, obviously none of us, that's not in anybody's best interest. So they need to be actively engaged. You can have, how you define what's actively engaged. That'll be an argument all the time too. But yeah, definitely if we could agree on a number, it'd be easy. But I guess we do support payment limits, and they probably should be lowered some.
The other thing, when you talk about payment limits, you forget about everything else that happens around you. Right. Is that, trade is far more important to us on our price than anything the government provides. Or there could be government policy that interrupts, like trade disputes or stopping trade. Even what we're doing with Russia now affects us as agriculture, so because we lose that market. So there are other things out there that are really as important. Immigration. 65% of all the milk harvested in the U.S. is done by immigrants. And so if something happened that caused, in effect, to lose that labor source, and quite frankly, they're not really talking about that specialized labor force because it's every day, 365 days a year, that you need that kind of labor. And if you lose that, you lose your milk production overnight. So immigration and trade are huge issues that affect us as farmers. In some ways, it's even bigger than the Farm Bill, because in 2013, we had a record export of dairy products. It had to do a little bit with what happened in Europe, a little bit what happened in New Zealand, but we had a record export, and consequently, we had a record high milk price. And for the first time I can remember in over 30 years of farming, we bought some new tractors instead of used ones. And we bought some new equipment and replaced it. We did some capital improvements because we had really a good milk price. So you can say all you want to about payment limits, and I believe there ought to be payment limits. I'm on Senator Grassley's side personally, but you can't forget about those other things that affect us.
Last question, Phil.
Yeah, okay. Wendy, I wanted to give you a chance. Talk about the research. We talked a little bit about water quality. Where do we need to spend more money? What needs to be done in the Farm Bill specifically in terms of priorities? What are we not giving enough of? One or two, besides the water quality issue that we've talked about.
The list is endless. Foot and mouth is a great example. I talked about with Gary here when we had avian influenza and 30 million birds died in Iowa. We weren't even sure exactly how the disease was being transmitted. So lots of conversations. We didn't understand if there was any genetic basis for resistance. We don't know if we could use gene editing in the future to change those birds so that they could be resistant. The list is literally it's just endless, and it relates to animal disease, plant disease. It relates to variable weather and how do you deal with emerging insects in your crops. So a big effort in the Farm Bill that was funded last time was the citrus greening. So you think about Florida, and all of us have an orange juice this morning. Citrus greening is a huge problem, and not just in the United States, not just in Florida, but in California too, and it will be in the world. And so how will we all have our orange juice? That's important to me and to most of the people. And again, an inadequate investment, so we're never prepared for the next crisis that's occurring in the food system, and you literally can't predict it. But when you are not providing the dollars for agricultural research, what happens is the best scientists say, well, I'm not going to work in agricultural research. I'm going to go work in medical research. And that's where the real loss occurs, because these scientists don't see the opportunity for their own careers. And so we lose some of the best minds that would have stayed in agricultural research if there had been an opportunity to work in it.
And you mentioned,
Maybe to make that point, you want to talk about the seedless watermelon?
Sure, yeah, sure. So Dr. Charlie Hall, we recruited him from Kansas State University, and Kansas State's my alma mater, and Charlie was going to continue his work on developing, refining really, the seedless watermelon, and he was going to do that with K-State and Iowa State, but K-State got mad and plowed up his watermelons, so we got lucky. So Charlie finished up his work. Charlie passed away this year, so that was sad. So I always ask my audiences, how much royalties did we get on the seedless watermelon last year? Anybody have a guess? Anybody heard me say this before?
Zero.
What?
Zero.
Zero. We got $900,000 because nobody's developed, bred a better seedless watermelon than Dr. Charlie Hall. So there are real opportunities, not just for innovation to solve big problems, but there are opportunities for entrepreneurship, there are opportunities for business development, opportunities for rural prosperity through science and innovation.
Yeah, okay. And just real quick, the trajectory, what's the trajectory you mentioned China. In relation to China, Brazil, India, what is our spending, research spending?
So if you combine China, Brazil, and India's spending in ag research again, they're spending more than $2 for every dollar we put into ag research.
Well, on that note, join me in thanking this panel, and we'll look.
Thanks, appreciate that.
I just can't